This is the Vision 79 podcast, where my friend Sander and myself, Mason, discuss recent developments in our business and our personal growth. The name Vision 79 comes from our respective racing numbers. Sanders is 40, mine is 39, and we have a shared vision for success in business and personal life. Many successful people have started small, just like us, but very few of them have documented their process from start to finish. We intend to be the first to document our journey the whole way through. I like to start each one of the podcasts with a brief weekly update. We do these podcasts weekly, so I like to give a summary to give future Mason and Sanders some context. And this has been a good week, I think. There's not a lot. Actually, there's more than I'm giving myself credit for here.
Yeah, there's been quite a bit of progress, I think.
Yeah, we've established two systems of documentation. One is an employee system of documentation. So when you need to hire an employee, how do you go about doing that? What do you look for in an employee? How do you track those things? And then the other is, how do you track inventory of your products? We've started both of those systems, and I think that both are coming along nicely. And we have a funding timeline confirmed, which is awesome. It's what we've been waiting on. Work has really dragged lately because we don't know when that funding is going to hit. And it's kind of like working endlessly with no end in sight, literally. Mm-hmm. And that's been really fucking difficult.
I feel much more hopeful now that we have like an estimate.
Yeah.
It's an estimate.
Yeah, exactly. Better. Yeah, it went from soon to specific date or specific date range, which really makes every day walking into the 9 to 5 that much more tolerable.
Yeah.
Which I'm very grateful for. So fucking amped about that. I think that's a bigger milestone than I feel right now because I'm pretty tired from this week. But I think that next week and in the coming weeks, it'll start to settle in. I even was making plans with my girlfriend the other day, and she's got some stuff coming up in the next couple weeks. And I was like, we can't make plans in the next couple weeks because you've got your thing. And then there's a block of time that's available. And then I am out. Like, I'm down for the count for like X foreseeable future after that. And that's really awesome to know, like, that's when I'm going to be busy and I'm going to be going so hard in the paint because I can prepare for it, you know?
100% agree. Yeah. I think it's very cool. I'm very excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
Long time coming for the estimate. So happy about that.
Yeah.
On personal life update, I bought the replacement for the 330 today.
Mm-hmm.
So
what happened to the old 330?
It got crashed.
Yeah.
Destroyed.
It's a bummer.
Saved my life though. So that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
you'd have died on a bike. For sure.
I probably would have died in the Miata too. Or been real fucked up.
I think you would have been hurt in the Miata, but I think you would have lived. I think a bike, there's no shot.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I would have been pretty screwed up in the Miata.
I think you'd be injured for sure, but I don't think you'd die. I think on a bike, it'd be like crushed everything, like super.
Yeah.
Or thrown from the injury and then killed by a oncoming car. I don't know which is worse.
So, yeah.
Anyways, I have a ton of shit for this week.
I got one more surprise update too.
Surprise update?
Yeah, surprise update.
Okay.
So I've been applying to jobs and stuff like that before we got the timeline for the funding and whatever. But I popped over to a couple dealerships this weekend, and I popped over to Mazda first. I thought I'd hit Porsche and BMW at the same time, but I ended up not having time because they had two different people interview me on the site, and they offered me a position as a sales guy. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't know if I'll take it or not, whatever.
What's the pay look like?
It's commission-based. On average, salesmen make about 60 a year, but their top salesman makes 150.
Okay.
So, you know, there's a range there.
Gotcha.
But it was just an interesting prospect. Cool. It didn't take much time to do. But now, since we have a real timeline and it's close, I think I'll probably lay off of that and just refocus.
Yeah.
So I might hit Porsche and BMW for shits and giggles just to see, just after work this week. But other than that, I'm excited about the timeline.
Yeah, absolutely, dude.
Yeah.
Congrats on the offer.
Thanks.
I always say that it's better to go and do the interview and then get an official offer and then make a decision, because if you make a decision before you interview, then it's like, you're making a decision on something you haven't tried yet. So why the fuck bother thinking about it? You don't even have a decision to make. You don't have a job,
right?
Like a job offer, right?
True. So that was cool. I was happy about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's dive into the body of the podcast.
I have so much shit. I have interesting stuff, a rant, and then quotes.
Got it.
I want to do the quotes last.
Okay.
But my interesting stuff is kind of cool.
You want to go first?
Yeah. Well, first off, I have a question for you, which is to put this in perspective of where we are at our life right now, I want to come back and rewatch this later and see how different we think when we're like 40 than right now. So I want to set a baseline, which is if I asked you, hey man, I need your help on this project, it's got to be good. Let's say it's a Creo file, like a CAD file, right? And I'm like, I need you to put some effort into this. What does a lot of work into that look like?
Like a lot?
Like a lot of work. What's a lot of work?
Given what timeline?
So for example, in college for our Creo final, Doug said, hey, make a CAD file of like an engine or a complex system, right? And I was like, I could do an engine, which is cool, or I could do a gun. And he was like, do the gun. And I was like, okay. So I put probably like 250 hours into that project. And at that time, I was like, that's a lot of time, right?
Really? You put that much into that?
Oh, fuck yeah. Dude. I became a Creo god because I wanted the whole thing. I had my buddies.
I probably had 40 hours into my engine that I built.
It was
I mean, it's an okay chunk of time. I don't see that as a lot of time.
Yeah. I had my buddy's revolver, that's the Indiana Jones gun, disassembled on my desk, and I wanted the whole thing to move like in Creo, and I wanted all the angles and stuff to be all original, so I had him pull up the blueprints to manufacture the gun, and I made it to spec. So I put in a lot of effort into it, but baseline in college, 250 hours was a lot of hours for me.
Right.
So if I were to ask you to do a similar project today, what would a lot of hours look like?
If I didn't have work and I could just use every day to work on it, I think total per week, a lot of hours would be like somewhere around the 100, 120 hour a week. Like that would be a lot, I think. And I think that's reasonable. I mean, that would be 18 hours a day.
Yeah.
I think that would be a lot. Like that would be
for how many
pretty close to balls to the wall. I mean, I think I could sustain it as long as there was work to be done on the project. Like, I think I could sustain that for multiple months, for sure.
We have sustained that for months.
For sure. Yeah. So I think I'd probably start to get beat around 9 months. I'd probably start to get a little bit beat. And I'd probably be like, okay, what's the next project at like, I mean, it really depends on the project, but maybe so like 2 years.
Instead of saying like year length, let's just say how many hours would you put into a CAD project to say that that was a lot of work? You did a lot of work on it. For example, in my junior year of college, 250 hours on a CAD program was a lot of time to put into that project. And I'm thinking in terms of our business, we've probably put in multiples of that into our business.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, that's been, if we do some quick maths, let's just say gratuitously, we've done 4 hours a day, 6 days a week for the past, is it 8 months?
Yeah.
September, October, November, December, January, March, April, May, June. So 9 months.
Yeah, 9 at this point.
Yeah, 9 months. So that's like 9 times 3, 270 days, 4 hours a day. So we're at like 1,200 something hours total.
4 hours a day?
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't account for weekends, though.
No, it does. This is conservative. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like bare minimum, because we also do it 6 days a week. We do it every day. Right. So far, we're probably like 1,200 hours deep in on this thing at a minimum. Right. I think it's probably closer to 1,500, if not more.
I think it starts to become a lot of hours on one project at like,
don't hurt yourself. Think
1,000, 1,500.
I think that's where my estimate is too.
I think that'd be, if I spent 1,000 hours on something or 1,500 hours on something, I expect to be closer to the end than I am from where I started.
Yeah.
Like I expect to be at least at the 50% mark.
Yeah. I think that after 1,000 hours, if I'm working on a single product, a system or system of systems is kind of different because that's a big project. But like if I'm working on a product for 1,000 hours, I think that's a lot of work, and that's probably sufficient for whatever it is.
Right. Yeah.
That's my line of thinking.
Depending. I mean, there are things that would definitely take more than that. And so it's like if I was trying to create a business from scratch that didn't exist yet and fabricating a market that I thought was going to be relevant in the future.
Right.
Then 1,000 hours might be just a start for that. But if you're building a model of something, then 1,000 hours, I think, is a lot.
Yeah, I guess it's contextualized.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I struggled a little bit to answer it. But I think regardless, I think if you put 1,000 hours into something, I think you've put a lot of work.
I think what is the threshold for professionalism? Like
10,000.
10,000 hours to be a professional in something? Okay. So then if you do 1,000 hours, we've been doing it for 9 months. We're at over 1,000. Let's just say every 8 months we can hit 1,000.
Or every year, I bet we could hit 2,000.
Yeah.
So in 5 years, wouldn't be professionals if we continue at this rate.
Right. And think of Hormozy with his gym launch stuff. He did that for like
he says it takes 3 to 5 years to figure out the real core problem in a business.
Yeah.
So that makes sense.
Yeah. I don't think I got good at rowing until I was in my 7th year. I think that your first 6 years, you think you know what you're doing, but you don't. Then in your 7th year, you start to pick it up and figure it out. And then by year 8, you're like, I know exactly how to do this, and I'm already broken. Like I fucked my body up already from full form, and now I know how to do it right, and it's too late to save me.
Right.
But yeah.
1,000 hours. That's my answer.
I think that's a good answer.
Is that where you're at too?
Yeah, just about. That's what I had been thinking. But I wanted to consider it because Hormozy says measure in hundreds of hours, right? So if we're measuring in hundreds of hours and 1,000 hours is a lot of time, then that's 10 lots of 100 hours, which doesn't sound like a whole lot when you contextualize it with the shit that he's doing. But I want to set a baseline because when we come back, we'll think, oh, fucking 250 hours on a Creo file isn't that bad. I've just spent 40,000 hours doing whatever, right? And I want to see like where we started to measure where we go.
1,000 hours, that's my answer.
Yeah, I've got one cool fucking thing that I learned this week, but I want you to go next.
Yeah, sure.
Before I leave that out.
Actually, link to Alex Hormozy content. I listened to the Alex Hormozy podcast this week about the trash collecting business that he built. Yeah. I don't know if you listened to that one. It's very good. He tries to build a trash collecting business, and he basically walks you through how to do it and what to do, what not to do. Very interesting. Alex Hormozy, The Game, on Spotify.
So now we've got to figure out a new business because he stole our idea.
No, we're producing trash. That's different. But one thing that really stood out to me in the podcast was his methodology regarding cold calling. And it's basically when you ask someone if they want X product, don't ask them if they want it, rather see if they would be opposed to you providing it. And I thought that was really interesting because it's a lot easier to say no, especially in a cold call situation. So you can reframe the question in such a way that you get the response you want, but that you don't force them to say yes.
Yep.
And I thought that was a really cool idea. I really like that. And that's something that stood out to me. And I'm actually going to re-listen to it too, because it's about 45 minutes, 40 minutes. And it's well worth a listen. I think it's definitely at least worth a second round. But I thought that was really cool. Do you recall anything from that podcast that you liked? Or?
I picked that exact nugget out, and every single time I listened to it, I think it was the day it came out, maybe Tuesday.
Yeah. I think I listened to it Thursday.
Yeah. The day it came out, I listened to it. And since then until now, when I ask someone for something, I've only asked them in a way that is like, do you mind? So even when I'm at the bar getting drinks, I'm like, oh, do you mind getting me a white or whatever, like a whatever kind of tea? Yeah. Or like the other day I asked Grace, I was like, do you mind taking the trash out? And I have not been told I'm not going to do that since then. Every single time I've asked someone to, and I mean, a bartender is always going to get me the thing, right? I'm a customer, but
that's good.
Generally speaking, even people at work, like I would ask, like I was like, oh, do you mind helping me with XYZ? And they're like, yeah. My coworker was giving me some really cool briefings throughout the week, and we got interrupted in a meeting. And so on Friday, I came to his desk and I was like, do you mind telling me that story that you got cut off with? And he was like, no, of course. He paused what he was doing.
Right.
But it works, even outside of sales, even just in conversation. It works.
Yeah. Alex Hormozy had a couple of those examples too in the actual podcast.
Yeah.
I really like that, though. I like that point a lot.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting, and I wanted to bring it to the table for the audience too.
It really shows me how little I know about sales right now, because to a salesman, that's probably a no-brainer. Like a lot of salesmen listen to that podcast, and they're like, yeah, duh, but I don't know jack dick about sales.
I've listened to a couple of different salespeople or podcasts talking about sales, and one of the things that I hear is that as soon as you get 3 yeses from your customer, it's time to close the deal. which is interesting because it kind of is a little bit counterintuitive to this method. But I see the logic in Alex Hormozi's method better. I think I see it more clearly.
I think by yeses they mean agreement, and they can be kind of the same thing.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
So you could probably use them in conjunction with each other.
Yeah, that's the first thing I had for this week,
dude.
What you got?
I was listening to some World War II stories, and I learned about survivorship bias because there's this story about planes in World War II that would come back from battle with bullet holes riddled through the planes, right? And the engineers would always say, "Oh, fuck, dude, there's so many bullet holes in this, but like look at all these those red dots. I'll have Future Sander put a picture on the screen.
Yeah.
All these red holes." And so the engineers would say, we've got to beef up these areas of the plane because they're getting holes shot through them, right? But what they then realized through the course of the war was, hang on a second, the planes that are coming back have the holes in these areas, right? But they're the planes that are coming back. Like they're re-landing again, meaning they survived. So these areas that are getting holes blown in them aren't important at all because the planes are making it back. The areas that don't have bullet holes in them need more armor because those are the planes that are not coming back, right? So survivorship bias is a cognitive shortcut that occurs when a successful subgroup is mistaken as the entire group due to the invisibility of the failure subgroup because they never made it back. The bias's name comes from the error an individual makes when a data set considers the surviving observations, excluding points that didn't survive. And this can be attributed to business because, as an example, many college students in business can recall successful unicorn startups, even though Forbes has reported that over 90% of startups have failed. So they can recall Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and shit starting in their basement. But you got to remember, there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of people just like them who started there and never made it. But people think, wrongly, that they can be the next ones because they're not considering the failures of others. And that's why I think it's so important, especially for small content creators like us, small scale right now, to observe what they're doing, note what they're doing wrong, and then listen to Hormozi and the other mentors and see what is the right thing to do. Because it's just as important to know how you failed as why you succeeded.
Yeah, 100%. I really like that. I'd never heard that before.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. About I'm still thinking about like the plane aspect of it too.
Yep.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And I could totally see how it would be easy to take that data set and not apply it in a way that would actually benefit the aircraft.
This turned the tides of World War II in our favor.
Interesting.
Other countries were taking their planes and bolstering the areas that had holes in them, and we were doing the same thing until we realized that, changed it, and enemies would shoot our planes like nonstop, fill it with holes, and then we'd keep flying, and they didn't know how it was done. It's because we were armoring the proper pieces of the jet. But I saw that and I was like, that's so fucking cool. I know there's a way to attribute it to business, but I don't know how. And eventually I made the tie to the startups because it's really easy to say, well, Hormozi's almost a billionaire. Well, fucking Kiyosaki's almost a billionaire. Well, Gates is a billionaire. Well, Musk is a billionaire. So why can't I do it, right? And like you need that motivation and you need that like retarded optimist in the back of your head to tell you that you can do it. But it's so important to not only look at the successes because they're so rare, that you have to also consider the failures and be aware that you're in dangerous waters. We're in a river where crocs get almost everybody who goes in. Yeah. Only a couple people have made it to the other side. And like, we can focus on how fast those guys swam, but if we're not looking at the dudes who like floundered in the water and got gotten by the crocs, we're fucked.
Yeah.
Right.
100%.
Because we haven't made it. Right.
Yeah.
We're still fucking shit. Right. There's so far to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not that we're doing shit. I'm fucking just tweaking here. It's a generalized message.
No, I get you though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. That's very interesting.
My next thing is a rant. Can you tell I'm getting fucking worked up to it? You do your next thing.
Got it.
Yeah, fucking fired up.
I had another Alex Hormozi thing to link to, and it's the Views Ain't Cash podcast regarding the individual who had an insurance billing business for dietitians. And they had 5,800 followers on Instagram, and their primary source of customers was through Instagram. And they were making $1 million a year in profit off of these 5,800 people. And I thought it was super interesting and Alex Hormozi did too, because it's not about the volume of people that you have following your content. It's about the quality of the people you have following your content, right? If you have something that's a very specific niche or that is tailored to a specific person, then you will attract that person because the algorithm on social media is good enough to find those people or find your content to give to those other people. And so I thought it was really cool. It made me think about the content structure of our podcast. I'd love to hear from whoever's listening if, you want more of a certain thing or something like that. I think it would just be interesting. But I thought that was super neat, and it really shows the importance of focus too. Because it's not like you can just, a lot of people, I feel like, think about business and investing or entrepreneurship as like, okay, in the same sense of like diversify. There's this like broad diversification mantra that's put onto a lot of like investment portfolios or school education and other stuff like that. And in business, I think it's much more important to focus in rather than diversify. And I thought that this bit from Alex Hormozi really exemplified that in a nice way.
Yeah. Well, they say you don't get rich by diversifying. You get rich by picking a single thing and becoming the best at it and then diversifying to keep your wealth, right?
Right.
That's why a 5% growth in the S&P 500 is great once you have money because it's not going to depreciate, but it's shit for making money because it's a point ahead of inflation, right?
Yeah.
But I think that what I pulled from that is the amount of followers you have doesn't matter if they don't buy your products. Right?
Yeah.
So I then attributed that to our business when we start our social media accounts. I want all of our followers that follow us to be customers, right?
Yeah.
I'm cool if my, cousin follows it to support me. That's fine. But I think that customer satisfaction is more, like quality is more important than quantity, I think, right? I don't want 10,000 followers, but have an empty, storefront.
Yeah.
Right? I want a full storefront and like 200 followers. That's cool. All you need is 200 people. That's another thing Hormozi said. Is like, if you only have an audience of 10 people, but you make 9 sales a day, I mean, that means that you're talking to real customers and you have a 90% success rate.
Yeah.
Right? And those are real people on the other side of the screen. Every like and every comment is a real person and they could be a customer.
Yeah.
And I think that especially shows how good she is, not only at like fucking sharpshootering a client base, but also providing immense value to everybody who does follow her because they only follow her as customers, right? Like they aren't following her like, oh, I heard about her and she's interesting. Like they're following her and buying from her.
Yeah.
Another interesting thing that Hormozi said about his trash podcast was, I'm going to call a buddy who needs his trash taken out. And then, after our shebang, hey, would you introduce me to someone else who also does this thing, who also needs my services, right?
Yeah.
Because for her, she might have done a podcast.
Would you mind introducing me to someone?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
She might have only done one cold call and then been introduced to somebody and introduced to somebody. And like now you're in the community,
yeah,
right? And everybody knows everybody. And so she introduced herself to all those people and then they followed her and became customers. And then you're basically cutting out all the fat and you're only taking the people who are going to be your customers and only interested in your content. I think it also helps that her business is fucking so boring to people who aren't in that space, right? Whereas if you own, I don't know, a baked goods business, like anybody can be mildly interested in that.
Yeah.
But if you own a fucking, I don't know, litter box insurance policy, like it's niche. You don't want to follow that because it's interesting to you. It's not interesting to anybody unless you're in the field, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, that was my second thing. What you got for
Here's my fucking rant, okay? Formula One has released their 2026 engine regulations. Here's the long and short of it, right? The cars are 30 kilograms lighter. They're touting that the cars are lighter. Note, between now and the 2008 V8 spec cars, they're 200 kilograms heavier. So we're not really making much progress back towards original, right?
So we're only 170 kilograms heavier.
That's right. There's a 55% reduction in drag.
Okay.
But a 30% reduction in downforce. So there's a lot less grip now. There's dumbass aero rules to make it easier for the cars behind you to follow, thus giving you less downforce. Right. And there's a 50-50 power split between the internal combustion engine and the battery unit.
That's the worst part.
And there's an electrical push-to-pass system.
That is.
And the wheelbase is shorter by 200 millimeters, which I believe is 20 centimeters.
That is.
Which is that. I think.
It's about 10 inches.
That.
Yeah.
That. Fucking, I'm so pissed because
I think the worst part of all of this is the power split between the internal combustion and the hybrid and the dumb ass passing button they're adding.
I know.
Yeah. Because all the other stuff could be cool. Like the less drag could be cool. The easier to follow could be cool because passing is always interesting to watch.
Right.
You know, the shorter wheelbase makes the car maybe a little bit more agile, which could be fun. But the hybrid split and the push to pass button, I mean, it's not a fucking K1 speed.
Yep.
It's a Formula 1 race.
Exactly. What pisses me off about it, I really hate the aero rules that reduce the downwash to let the cars behind you catch up to you, because that's essentially saying you need to build a slower car so that other people can catch you easier. And that's against the spirit of competition for me personally. Because what's your ideal car? Max downforce, minimal drag, because you want high speed on the straights, right? And you want downforce around the corners. So by nature, if you just let a fast car be designed as a fast car, it'll have low drag, meaning the guy behind you can get past you, and high downforce, meaning you have grip around the corners, right? Just let them build the fucking car.
Wait, high drag though, right?
Low drag. Because think about it this way. A rear wing creates a lot of downforce, but it also creates a lot of drag on the straights. It's downforce around the corners, it's drag on the straights. Underfloor effects create a lot of downforce because it suctions the car, but it's not much drag. It doesn't hurt you on the straights. So if you do you remember that it's an all-electric Volkswagen with a big wing on the back, but it's got a crazy underfloor and it just gleams.
Oh yeah, that DPI thing.
Yeah, whatever. Right? Fucking nutty car, right? So much of it's like 3 times the weight of the car comes from the underfloor effect.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And there's not much drag on the rear wing, right? It's optimized for curb circuits, right? So it's not a dragster. But if you just let cars be designed to be fast, it's great. My biggest beef with it is the fucking weight. The electrical systems, right?
Yeah.
They're reducing the weight, 30 kilograms less, right? But the electrical systems are going to weigh way more. So much more. If you get rid of the electrical systems, and here's the fucking God honest truth of it, if you get rid of all the electrical systems, you remove the 200 kilograms of weight. Yeah. That's what's making them weigh so much. So if you just, and it fucking is so upsetting to me because the reason they have the hybrid turbos is because of the fucking emissions, right? But they jump around the country, right? Did you know that one trip from one of their private jets burns more fuel than an entire race weekend across all practice sessions, all cars, and all 3 racing series?
Yes.
Ridiculous. Why the fuck are you building the cars this way? It's so infuriating to me. It's so infuriating.
Well, California has also implemented laws, rules, and regulations to restrict classic cars from being able to run at these historic circuits because of the pollution that they generate.
Yep.
But these cars run 2-3 times a year.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like negligible. It's really negligible.
Yep.
And it's like, why? What's the point of these laws? They're not making an impact. Why don't you just let race cars be race cars and address like the big issues in the picture?
Yep.
You know, address industrial pictures because that's a majority of the, pollution that we have.
Yeah.
Anyways, by single part. I mean, outside of, I think passenger vehicles are very close, if not just a touch above. But, there is progress being made on the passenger vehicle side, but the problem is that the progress being made is just throwing the pollution at a different sector, which is the industrial sector.
Right.
So, ultimately, I think the solution has to come from the industrial side of things, which is not being focused on.
Interestingly,
or at least in my opinion, it's not being focused on.
Sebastian Vettel made a great point, which is that his fuel shebang, whatever he's doing to try and make more emission-friendly fuels, is at the point where they can create like a net zero act, right?
Yes.
So the fuels are sustainable.
It's the Porsche synthetically generated gasoline.
Yes.
Yeah.
The fuel is regenerable. They're using less tires at all these circuits. So like you have less tires to race over a weekend because it saves whatever. They're getting rid of the tire warmers because of fucking dumbass reasons.
They're getting rid of the tire warmers? Why?
Yeah, they want to. Because it uses energy or some shit. It creates some kind of fucking pollution. I can't recall. It's some dumb shit. Wow. But they want to get rid of the tire warmers. And so everyone's like, hey, like you're making the cars just as heavy, slightly smaller, but still like just as wide. So you're not really helping us out here, right? There's less drag. There's less downforce, more drag, right? And like the ratio between the two.
Right.
And the cars are way heavier and they don't sound good. They don't feel good. Like fucking, why am I racing, right? So Max is going to leave. Of course he would. I would too. But there's nothing stopping, and they changed their travel schedule. So they're not zipping all around the globe anymore. It makes more sense. They do like all of Asia, Europe, the US, whatever. Apart from like some odds and ends. But they saved a ton of money in fuel in cleaning up this calendar, right? And I would argue, if you're that worried about the fucking emissions, take a race or two off the calendar. We don't need 28 races. Give me 20 and give me fucking B10s back.
Yeah.
It's so infuriating. I got so fucking pissed.
I don't think anyone is really excited about it.
The aero rules kill me. Yeah. They kill me, dude. It's like saying design a business that makes it easier for your competitors to catch up to you.
Yeah.
Like, the goal shouldn't be to make it easier or harder for your competitors. The goal should be to build the best business that you can. Build the best race car that you can, right? Don't worry about your, like, how much food is in your neighbor's bowl. Like, only look at it to make sure he has enough.
Yeah.
Not as much as you.
Right.
It's so infuriating. That's my rant.
Yeah.
Let race cars be race cars again.
Let race cars be race cars. I would agree with that. It's very frustrating where the sport is going.
Okay, so that's my rant. What's your next thing?
My next thing is a political thing.
Okay.
And I don't want to make it too political. I just want to point out the fact that I think we're at a really sad place.
Can we take one moment to appreciate the time before we were canceled? Okay, go for it.
No, I don't think we'll be canceled for this.
You can't cancel it.
We talked about this briefly earlier this week, and I thought it was really interesting, and I think you can present it in a bipartisan way.
Cool. Thanks for putting that pressure on me. I got it. Go for it.
There was a Wall Street Journal podcast regarding the Biden border policy. That was essentially...
Biden's border policy?
Right. Was essentially a copycat rebranded of Trump's border policy.
Yeah.
And essentially what the policy does, for those of you who don't know, and you can look this up too to confirm it, but I looked it up earlier for your benefit. Suspension of asylum eligibility, which, creates the potential for deportation if you're here illegally in the country. But this does not include unaccompanied children or victims of trafficking into the U.S., which I think makes sense.
Can you explain that a little bit for me?
So if you are in the United States illegally, if you came here because you crossed the border illegally with your family, or you came here as an adult and wanted to get a job here to send money back home, you are subject to deportation.
Cool.
But if you are a child
or sex trafficked
or were sex trafficked into this country, you are not subject to deportation. You can seek asylum. It's an easier process if you're an unaccompanied child or if you were trafficked into this country.
Okay.
So, which I think makes sense.
Okay.
There are heightened screening standards, which means it's harder to acquire asylum if you seek it. There is stronger border enforcement and security, and there's more encouragement of seeking legal means to enter the U.S. rather than jumping the border and then seeking asylum.
Yeah.
Now, essentially, this was a copycat of what Trump tried to implement during his office time. And now it's been rebranded and has Democratic support, whereas when it was presented with the Trump campaign, it did not have Democratic support. In fact, Biden and the Democratic Party were harshly against it and opposed it. And you can look up those videos of those conferences yourself, but I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
And it's really sad to me that Biden has completely switched his perspective, seemingly so because he's seen that having a strong border policy increases votes for him. And I think it's really sad to have someone in office at any point in time who cannot think freely for themselves and make their own decisions based on who they are. Like, you vote for the person when you go and vote for someone. And it seems like if you're voting for Biden, you don't even know who you're voting for because he changes his policy based on whoever says you can do this to get more votes or whoever has this influence, which I think is really disappointing. But honestly, not that surprising given, the past 4 years or 3.5 years that we've had.
Yeah, go ahead.
And so that was basically my spiel about the border policy. And I think it's just sad that we're at a place in America where we can't seem to trust the people that are currently in power, at least currently in power. And I hope that one day we can get to a place where there can be communication and it doesn't seem like everything is about pleasing someone else. I want honest, straightforward political communication and people in power who reflect that.
I can almost guarantee you that'll never happen.
Yeah, I don't think it. I think it's a pipe dream for sure.
Yeah, and I think
it's just disappointing because I think it's gotten only worse.
Oh, for sure. I think that the real root of the issue is there are good politicians out there. There are good candidates who mean well, but they can't climb to the top step because you have to wade through a sea of corruption and, people who want to tell people what they want to hear so that they get their votes, so that they have insider trading information so that they can make more money or status or symbol or power or whatever, right? You have to wade through the sea of assholes to get to the top. And by the time you get there, you're one of them.
Yeah.
Like you don't even realize it's happening until you're there. And then you're like, oh, fuck, I'm, falsifying votes because it's the way the game is played and it's the only way I can get myself up there and I have good intentions. But in falsifying those votes, you don't, right? The only way to get there, the only way to beat the game is to play the game, and to play the game makes you a villain, right?
Yeah.
And so really the best thing I think that could be done about it is just a reset of this. Like everybody has to be swapped out with people who mean well, and that can't really happen logistically, right? But while we're talking about the border thing, I want to bring something to everyone's attention that I don't think is talked about enough. A lot of people without getting too political, what are the main concerns that people generally have with illegal immigrants crossing the border? Just off the top.
I mean, the first things that come to mind are crime, pulling from government money, not paying taxes,
homelessness.
Those are the big ones. Those are the big ones. I think those are the big ones.
There's a fucking huge one that not enough people talk about or give any consideration to, and I didn't realize until I started working in the Department of Defense, or a contractor for the Department of Defense, which is, how do you think the guys who stole the jets on 9/11, who hijacked the planes, got into the country? It wasn't legally.
Yeah.
So when the Hamas stuff kicked off in Sandland, there was a huge concern about Hamas agents getting in through the southern border. They would fly to Mexico and then cross the southern border freely. There are videos of known terrorists from the Hamas organization crossing the border. They have their faces on camera, and the people who are holding the cameras don't know who they are. But later on, they go back. I think one of them, I might be misremembering this as Hamas from someone else, but as he was crossing the border, a journalist stopped him and asked him, he was like, what do you hope to do in the U.S.? And he was like, you know me. He was like, I don't know you. And he was like, you will know. America will know my name, right? And then he was like, okay. And he let him walk through the border, right? Because he's a journalist. And later on, he was identified, I believe, as a terrorist, right?
Yeah.
It's a huge national security threat to have an open border like that, because every foreign adversary can get agents through with no issue at all, right? And that's a huge fucking threat. Now, on the difference between what you want to hear and authenticity, I think that there's a huge divide with the political parties. Generally speaking, I think people hate Trump because he'll say what he wants to say and he says dumb shit.
Yeah.
People hate Biden because he talks out of his ass and makes false promises, right?
Yeah.
Those are the negative ways of viewing it. The positive ways of viewing it are Biden tells you what you want to hear, helps you sleep at night. Trump is genuinely authentic and is himself no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that each party prefers that way, right? So like Democrats generally prefer to be told what they want to hear to make themselves feel better.
Yeah.
And Republicans prefer to hear the harsh truth of the way things really are, right?
Yeah.
And that's just a generalized split between people, but it's not a trend that I had picked up until just now, but I'm not comforted by false promises, right? I'm more comforted by authenticity. Even if it's not a truth that I like, it's the truth. And that's what I prefer, right? Yeah. Honestly, I don't think that Trump or Biden are the best presidential candidates that are out there.
Yeah.
But if they're the ones that are in office and that's the selection that we have, and there's not much we can do about it. Right. Though I have heard recently that people are considering, there's been a lot of negative Joe Biden stuff lately. I mean, people recognize that this immigration policy was actually Trump's, right?
Yeah.
People are starting to recognize that there are wars kicking off now. And through Trump's presidency, he's, I think, the only president in modern history who wars haven't been started under. 0 wars started under Trump's presidency. People are realizing these things, and people are starting to talk about, when the Democratic convention comes up, they might not elect Joe Biden to be their runner. Like they might realize that there's a shift in the tide and pick someone else. You never know which way it's going to go. But generally speaking, I think that the immigration policy thing, I mean, it's all just a fucking mess in politics. But
it is a mess.
If we can pull anything out of it, I think it would be when we're speaking to people, customers, business partners, friends, family, right? I personally view it as respectful to give them the authentic truth. And I consider it to be an act of pity and disrespect to tell them what they want to hear if it's not true.
Yeah.
So that's what we can take out.
I would agree with that. And that's part of the reason why I brought it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a good thing to take out of it.
Yeah. No, I think so too.
Yeah.
I think so too.
Mm-hmm. I got a bunch of quotes.
Yeah. With them. Those are actually all my points for today.
That's everything?
Yeah, that's what I had. I thought they'd be longer, honestly. I wrote a
a
lot, so I was like, oh man, like this will take a while. But then as I was going through it, I was like, these are all kind of shorter points. I mean, they're interesting. I mean, I think they're interesting. But
we haven't even gotten to my quotes yet, so buckle up and let me talk for 3 hours. Okay, so actually, since we have time, if you're cool with it, I'll work through my quotes one at a time. We'll hit all of them.
Yeah.
The first one is a Jerry Rice quote. I've started to look into like not Hormozy or Williamson or anything quotes, but just generalized quotes. I'll work through a couple of others, and then I'll work through one on my own. The first one is from Jerry Rice. Today I will do what others won't, so tomorrow I can do what others can't. And that's what has given me energy this past week to get to work after work, because I've been good with my workouts this week. I worked out 46% of the days in April, and then I worked out 58% of the days last month. And I'm aiming for 80% of the days this month, which is essentially taking 2 days off a week or like not working out on weekends.
Cool.
I worked out yesterday, so I'm a day up, right? But that means I'm going to work on time now because I got shit for it. Actually working at work because I'm in a situation where I have to apply myself. And then hitting the gym and then getting to work. And that's fucking sucked. And then getting to bed at a good time. And that's been fucking terrible. But this quote was really interesting. And I'm just wondering, what do you think that we do now that others won't do? Not can't, but choose not to, that won't do, apart from work like we're fucking, like working with a gun to our head?
I think other people don't seek out things that challenge them.
Mm-hmm.
I think other people seek out things that lack challenge because it makes their life easier or temporarily easier.
Like what?
Taking cold showers, trying to start a business, learning new things in the business spec or a financial, sector.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to seek out people for help, utilizing tools like ChatGPT or Canva AI or Adobe AI or CapCut to make their lives easier, and instead they just be okay with having a subpar product that they can throw up if they choose to do some social media content.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think other people choose to go through the arduous process of social media analytics to try and figure out when the best times to post are, how can we change our content, how can we adjust it, because they see it as, oh, Mark Zuckerberg just started in his basement and I can start in my basement too. So I'll just do basement things. Right. I think those are a few things that we do that other people choose not to do, that they won't do because it is uncomfortable, it's challenging, it takes effort, it takes time, it takes perseverance, and there's not much reward.
Do you think those are the people who want to have billion-dollar businesses, or do you think those are the people who just have their 9 to 5 and they're happy with it?
I think those are the kind of people who have their 9 to 5 and they're happy with it, but they window shop their dreams. And what I mean by that is they sit at their desk and they're like, man, it would be nice to be like this guy, or like, it would be really nice to have X, Y, and Z. They don't actually take initiative to go get those things.
Must be nice.
Yeah, must be nice. Because it is easier to live like that. Yeah. It's easier to sit and complain about your life and be upset with where you are and just be jealous of other people or give false reasons for why they made it than to actually make it happen for yourself.
I have this spectacular coworker. She's such a hard worker. She's really good at what she does. Mm-hmm. And I admire her for her work ethic.
Yeah.
And she talks about wanting her own business and wanting. She's an entrepreneur. Right?
Yeah.
And she tells me about the steps that she takes. And she's like, oh, I'm doing this course to learn about the basics of business. I'm like, that's awesome. Like, stick with it. And she'll say like, oh, I'm starting my own website with like Shopify or whatever, right? And I'm like, that's awesome. And she's like, yeah, I'm just kind of stuck. And I was like, hey, like the most important step is the first one. So like you're crushing it, right? Just keep up with it. Because if you don't keep up with it, like if you don't use it, you lose it, right?
Yeah.
And it's difficult because I feel like there are so many people in the world who want the same things we want, but don't recognize how much work it takes to get there. They're not the people who recognize how much work it takes to get there and lie to themselves and say, I don't need it, right? They're the people who go, oh, I think if I try, I can probably get there, or at least partially there, right? And those are the people who work at it maybe they dedicate like an hour or 2 hours after work 2 or 3 times a week. And then on their weekends, they use to relax, right? But
because they work so hard during the week.
They do. But it is a shame to me because I feel like a lot of people have this realization in their 40s, right? And by then they think it's too late. My parents are a great example, right? I got my dad, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, a paperback cover of the book as a birthday present for him because I was like, hey, this is when I was moving out. And I was like, hey, I'm moving out. I am on a different path than you think that I'm on. And I'm going to make some weird decisions that you don't agree with. I want you to read this so that you can speak my language and communicate with me while I go through this. Mm-hmm. I don't want to lose touch with you because I'm on this different path. And he was like, cool. I don't think he's touched it. At least last I was home, I don't think he's touched it. But I know that he and my mom, I've talked about them. I'm like, you have so much equity built up in your house, get a rental house and put some tenants in it. You have so much in your 401k. Pull some of it out, get a rental house, start a business, invest something, like do something, right? It's not too late. And their opinion is, oh, it's too late, right? Like we're almost to retirement or we're just old, we're tired. Like we had kids, we did all that and we're tired. And that leads me to my second quote, which is by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And it is not true that people stop pursuing dreams when they grow old. They grow old because they stop pursuing their dreams. And I think that's embodied by Colonel Sanders, who tried to sell his chicken recipe into his 60s. And I think when he was 65, he finally sold the recipe and was a millionaire in like 8 months.
Yeah.
Right? But when people like my parents lose sight of their dream, they get old and then they get
it's like the people who live longest are the ones to work until death.
Yep, exactly. Look at Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, right? I mean, rest in peace, Charlie Munger. But,
99.
He worked up until the day he died and he loved every minute of it, right? Because he never let go of those dreams. He never got old.
Yeah.
I mean, you can say that he died of old age, but fucking like he was sharp as a whip to the end, from what I've heard.
Right.
Yeah. And dude, especially in the rowing community, there are a lot of old gents who are fucking on it, right? Like in their 60s, they're still rowing and they're still super sharp and they're fucking good at what they do. And I've always admired them and wanted to be like them because they are on top of it when you don't expect them to be. And it's because they never give up those dreams and they keep working towards it. And this is an interesting thought because I think that the soul truly dies when you give up on your dreams. And that's when you grow old. And that's when you settle. And these people in their 40s and 50s at our offices who are waiting out retirement, they're getting old because they've given up. They didn't give up because they got old.
Yeah, it's like I can almost watch my coworkers age. Like not in a literal sense, but like I can watch them just sit at their 9 to 5 and be content with not doing anything and not really making any genuine progress, at least from my perspective, and just living out their lives that way forever.
Yeah.
And that's just crazy.
I've been asking people a lot of questions at work recently because I'm actually working, which means I have less time to do this kind of work. So I've been kind of blending the two together. While I'm at work, I'll ask people weird fucking questions. And that relates to my quote that I have this week. But one of the questions I've been asking is, what do you want the next 10 years to look like for you? Like, what's the difference between you today and you 10 years from now?
Yeah.
And a lot of them are like, I don't know. I don't think about
body aches.
I kind of just think about like tomorrow or next week. And I don't really think about me in 10 years. But I mean, I guess I'll have X amount more in my 401k and I'll be like a decade closer to retiring. And like maybe I'll own a sports car by then. And I'm like, that's it. Those are the things you want. You want more money in your retirement plan. You want a sports car and you want to be closer to retirement. Like, and I'm not judging them in person, but internally in my head, I'm thinking, I do not share these goals with you. And I do not have these things in common with you. Why am I different? Right? I have those thoughts a lot.
Yeah.
But
I think a lot of people put a lot of emphasis on being happy in their life too.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people spend all of their time and energy focusing on how to try and make themselves feel happy.
Yeah.
Whereas you could focus on doing things that will progress you as a person, and then happiness will be a function of the things that you do well in your life, right? If you do certain things really well in your life and you progress and grow as a person, you will start to be rewarded by the things you do because you're good at them, and that will bring you happiness.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to focus your life on just trying to find happiness, because then what you're going to do is just find a bunch of little things throughout your life to compile together to wash out all the negative things that you haven't addressed because you're too lazy or unmotivated to address them.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really common problem, especially in the younger generation, like our generation. I see that a lot where people just focus on the small things to wash out the big things that they're too scared to address or don't want to address.
I think there's a misconception too that happiness is like a constant state of being.
Yeah.
I've thought about this a lot too, which is I think that happiness isn't a general state of being. It's a string of moments. Kind of like how greatness isn't all the time, it's moments, right? Great example, right? Max Verstappen, right? Arguably like one of the most talented Formula One drivers to ever live, right? He had a fucking incredible season last year, right? It's the most, hands down, mathematically, the most successful season in Formula One ever, right? But there were, I think, 2 races that he didn't win, right? But by not winning those 2 races, nobody questioned for a minute that he was washed or done or lost his talent because he has so many moments of greatness. Similarly, with happiness, happiness isn't, I feel good all the time. Happiness is generally, over the course of the last X amount of time, I've been not sad or I've been not depressed, right? You can't say that you're happy or not. I gave up on happiness after my last breakup. I was like, I'm just going to be depressed. It's just going to be the way that it is, and I'm going to go about life, and I don't fucking care anymore, right? I need something bigger than myself, dedicate myself towards, so that I don't think about how sad I am all the time, right? And that's what SAE was for me.
Yeah.
And through working on SAE, I realized, oh, hey, like I didn't want to kill myself today. Like today was pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
Maybe tomorrow will be cool too. And if I think about it, I can put myself back in that broken body, right? So like, dude, when I get into the cardio pieces like I did yesterday, and I was like, oh, I'm going to do like an easy like 150 heart rate thing. Yeah. But I get back into the saddle of competition, like physical competition. That's where I go. That's the fucking, there's a Conor McGregor talking to some other UFC fighter. I wish I remembered who it was. I'm sure you've seen this TikTok, Joe Rogan talking about it. He's like, oh yeah, Conor McGregor was like, oh, I'm going to beat the shit out of you in the ring and I'm going to fuck your mom. And like being loud. And this other guy was like, I take my opponents into deep water.
Oh yeah. It's that,
I think it's Khabib.
Yes.
Something. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's like, I drag my opponents into deep water and that's where they find themselves and they don't like who they are. Some shit like that. Right.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where I go. Is I go to where I am the most broken and that's where I do my best work. Right. So like, no fucking happy person has that, right? No fucking happy person is so broken that they can select when to flip the switch and become like fucking demonic, right? Happy people don't do that. But I would say generally, I'm happy with my life right now.
Sure, yeah. Do you think that's why people who grow up in wealthy families tend to be less successful afterwards? Because they don't have those experiences or as many of those experiences throughout life to help them get into that just grind. Happiness is an important stage.
I think that a lot of the reason that people who grow up wealthy don't live on to be wealthy is because their parents don't understand the meaning of wealth. And Hormozy has a great quote about this, which is the meaning of generational wealth isn't dollars, it's information.
Yeah.
Generational wealth isn't the money, it's teaching them how you made the money. And I feel like a lot of wealthy people raise their kids with fucking Lamborghinis and all this fancy shit, right? For example, one of Grace's ex-boyfriends, his parents bought him a Lamborghini Gallardo in high school as his first car. Yeah. He owns a C8 Corvette. He's got a fucking right-hand drive GTR. He's got all this fancy shit, right? But Grace broke up with him because he just sat inside and played video games all day. He has no idea how his parents made that money, right?
Yeah.
When they die, he'll get millions in his trust fund, right? But he's not going to know what to do with it. And just like the people who win the lottery in our last podcast are going to blow it all, right? Because their parents don't understand the meaning of wealth. The meaning of wealth is information, not dollars. right? I think that's
an
why.
interesting take.
I think that's why they never make it. Like, I think that if when we become successful, we sit our kids down like Rich Dad did with Robert Kiyosaki, and we teach our kids how we made our wealth, they'll grow up to be rich. If that's what they so choose. It's up to them.
Yeah.
Anyways, I've got 2 more quotes, but they're kind of mid. My last one is one that I've given a lot of thought to this week. It's my own quote.
Go for it.
And I'll start with this. Are you afraid of dying?
No.
Do you worry a lot?
Not really. I mean, I worry. No, I don't worry. I stress and then I address.
That's a good one.
Stress that is a good one. Stress and address. That's good. I dig that.
Hormozy has this thing. Hormozy and Chris Williamson talk about this a lot. They say your worries always end up in death. I'm going to hit at the barista at the coffee shop. She's going to laugh at me. Everyone in the coffee shop will laugh at me. My friends will find out about it. They'll laugh at me. They'll disown me, and then I'll die alone.
This is such a Chris Williamson, Alex Hormozy.
It is.
It is. Yeah.
So I did some critical thinking on that, which is, are you afraid of death because you're a worrier and you worry about everything, so you'll worry about dying naturally? Or are you a worrier because you're afraid of dying? Which drives which, or are they unrelated and they're just a correlation? Right? Mm. And so I started to ask my coworkers at work, hey, are you afraid of dying? And they're like, what the fuck? It's noon on a Thursday. What? And I'll be like, are you afraid of dying? And they'll be like, oh, fuck it, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, so if I told you that, at the end of the day tomorrow, you're going to die of chronic illness in your sleep, would you be terrified? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, do you worry a lot? And they're like, well, fucking what? And the general trend I've seen is people who don't worry are also not worried about death. Mm. And so I kind of worked this problem backwards in my own quote. This is my quote. To worry over that which is out of your control is fruitless. To worry over that which is within your control is procrastination. That's my own quote. So to worry about death it's going to happen to everybody. You're not going to get anything out of worrying about it. Who the fuck cares? Yeah. But if you're worried about something that you have control over, how much money you make, how fast you can drive, are you going to eat this afternoon? Are you going to do well at this PowerPoint presentation? That's all within your control, right? Go find a job that makes more money. Take driving lessons to learn to drive faster. Go to Starbucks and get food. Practice your PowerPoint presentation. All those things are within your control. So if you're worried about something that's within your control, you're just procrastinating. And that ties into anxiety, which is I have a lot of things to do and I'm not doing any of them. So the way to defeat anxiety is just start doing your things. It helps to set a priority order. Do them. But that's my personal quote that I came up with this week.
I like that a lot.
Cool.
Yeah, because I don't really... Because I mean, now thinking about it, I don't really worry too much about shit. I think I feel a stress and then I figure out how to address it.
Yeah.
I dig it.
Yeah.
Cool.
That was my own quote. I find that at first I was like, one podcast a month is good. And then you're like, let's do one a week. And I was like, that's a lot. And then it turned out that it wasn't a lot. And then I was like, well, I have one quote a week that I can talk about. And I was like, that's not a lot. I can do one quote a day. Right. And I've gotten to the point where I'm finding one quote a day and doing critical thinking about it with no problem, but applying it is super different. Coming up with these Hormozy level quotes are fucking challenging. I've been trying. And so I've been coming up with one a week of my own quotes, trying to do it. And I work on it all week. From the get-go, from day one, Monday, I was like, I'm going to figure out this death thing and figure out how worrying works and backwards engineer it into my own quote, because I want to start having my own philosophical quotes. I don't want to have a lot of other people's philosophical quotes in my repertoire. I want to know how to do the philosophical quotes. I want to learn that skill and master it. Yeah. Because I thought about this the other day too. If Hormozy kicks down that door right now and says, we're doing another podcast and I'm going to be in it, what the fuck are you going to say? We're going to sound like idiots because we don't think on that same level as he does. And we haven't done as much critical thinking as he has. And if we keep listening to these podcasts but never do any of our own critical thinking, we'll never get there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like we can listen to business stuff, but if we never start our own business, we'll just be chuckle fucks.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
What are you writing down?
I wrote down tips for myself how to improve my podcast seating.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good. That's it. That's all the stuff I have. I have 2 more quotes, but they're kind of mid, so I'm going to skip past them.
Okay.
Cool.
Well, I'm super happy with that.
Yeah, me too.
Did a solid update. Went through a few things that I think are useful to other people or at least interesting.
Yep.
listen to the 2 Alex Ramosi podcasts that we mentioned, or at least 2, if not more. They're super well worth your time, and they're not terribly long. So that's all I got.
Yeah,
anything to add?
That's it.
Happy camper?
Yeah, I'm good.
Cool. Thank you very much, and be well.